Our theme this month is the joy of living. And today's topic is living with the law of spirit. Last month we spent considerable time looking at the culture and the ideas in the United States between 1920 and 2020, as related to the materials, the language, and the metamorphosis of thinking related to metaphysical concepts. This month, I'm taking a different path about metaphysics. This is with something which may well be considered timeless. Back even before 1920, Ernest Holmes was writing and teaching about the love of his life, the fundamentals of metaphysics. His materials were not being published then, but they were being retained. In 2001, through the Center for, actually it was then called the United Church of Religious Science, before it became the United Center of Religious Science, and eventually merged with Religious Science International to become Centers for Spiritual Living, which we now are. But back in 2001, in support of the efforts of Reverend Dr. Marilyn Leo, they published a composite of Holmes' works titled Love and Law. I'll show you the book. The Unpublished Teachings. It says that right on the cover. Dr. Marilyn was the stepdaughter of Reginald Armour, and he was a close personal friend and an associate of Dr. Holmes. In fact, Reginald Armour was on the founding board of governors of the Institute of Religious Science and School of Philosophy when it was originally convened in 1927. So there's a lot of history here. Marilyn Leo is still with us, incidentally, here in this human experience. In fact, she founded and continues to manage the Science of Mind archives and foundation for Centers for Spiritual Living. Those archives are housed at our home office in Golden, Colorado. Dr. Marilyn has been my muse, my source of inspiration for many years. I have a small picture over here I'll show you, and you can come up and look at it afterward if you'd like to. This is a face of depth and knowledge and love that, if you ever have the chance to meet her, and I'm going to offer you such an opportunity before this day is over, this woman knows more about the history of science of mind and the life of Ernest Holmes than any other spiritual being having a human experience still here on planet Earth. Just an incredible woman to know and to be in her presence. But she is extremely magnificent in the real thing, in addition to a beautiful picture. She is at the young age of 85, still going strong. And so is the book, incidentally. It's available on Amazon.com. It appears to have a new cover. It looks like perhaps that cover is super imprinted over this one, because this one is behind it when you flip the page online. But as far as I can tell, it has not been edited in any way. So the original materials that she gathered and put into the book are still there in the order in which she did that. So today, I want to begin this series by presenting Living in the Law of Spirit. You'll note that the title of the book, the title of the book is Law and Love. But today I want to talk about the law before I talk about love next week. Dr. Holmes would be the first person to tell you that if you want to live in and with law, you must learn and practice. If you want to live and learn in love, first you have to live and practice the law. In a series of talks that Dr. Holmes gave in 1918, he began by saying, "There is only one thing that I ask of you, and that is that you will believe absolutely that this thing works." Remember, in the very first chapter of the Science of Mind text, the title of that chapter is The Thing Itself. And so here he is in 1918, before the book was even written, talking about the thing itself. If you don't believe it works, he said, then it does not work. You see, he was quoting page 52, and he hadn't even written it yet. So now we know where that came from, standing in front of a class of eager listeners, just like you are right now, talking about the love and the law. So everything is mind, he reminds us, and all operation is thought. Every law in the universe is the power of mind in action. Everything we have ever seen, see now, or will see in the future is simply the result of mind in action. We have a body. In Standing in the Light, a couple of us talked about our bodies this morning and how they react to or respond to what's going on in our thinking. We have what we call a physical environment. And we would have neither of those except for mind. When we learn to live for today, we get a lot more out of life. Holmes said in this class that he was talking to, the materials that I'm sharing with you now, said in that class, when you have as much fun as I have had today, you can be as prosperous as anyone and be as well, too. And then he goes on to say, there's no reason to worry about tomorrow. That is surrendering to fear, which is a natural consequence of the belief in limitation. Remember that line. That is so important. When we are in limitation, that's the fear that comes up as a result. But working to become less limited, he said, means absolutely nothing. It's worthless unless you absolutely believe it always works and failure is not an option. You know, that's one of those phrases that you sort of like to put on the mirror or lay it on your dashboard. Failure is not an option. In fact, he said, if we could add to the commandments, you know, the 10 commandments in the Old Testament of the Bible, if we could add to the commandments, the greatest would be mind your own business. So what Ernest meant for us to understand is that we are dealing with an eternal principle, which is mathematically correct, what he calls the law of spirit. It is not to the sentimental ones who gush and gush that big results come. It is to those who think deeply and simply and pertinently and persistently. They know that what they believe and have chosen brings a perfect result. When you know this, he said, you can approach infinite mind with a depth of understanding and thought. We then realize that we are dealing with the true reality, with a tremendous reverence that transcends the orthodox idea of prayer. Let me say that again. When we realize that we are dealing with the true reality, which is the direct connection with spirit, with a tremendous reverence that transcends orthodox methods of prayer. With the utmost reverence, we acknowledge that being that we call God. We accept that its greatest activity is through the human instrument. That would be you and me. We say that we are the activity of God in expression, and that there is one power, infinite, operating, always producing, eternally creating, and flowing through each one of us, individually, at the level of each one's consciousness. It, that's a capital I, it speaks, and its word becomes law. And the law is what manifests the conditions. And so, we speak into this mind, capital M, this infinite creative power, and so it returns to us. Holmes calls that, you have manifested every word you speak. Hear my words. Every word you speak. Another way to say that is, whatever you set in motion in this eternal mind is done unto you. Practicing the law of spirit means understanding and taking action according to it. We don't get to change the rules. Holmes recognized how important it is for us to understand that this creative energy is eternally seeking avenues of expression. It's what he dubbed the divine urge. But sometimes we forget. We forget that we have been created to choose our own way. Sometimes we choose struggle. Sometimes we choose limitations. Sometimes, in the judging of others, we choose to fill ourselves with the very thing we abhor. That song we sang a few moments ago, Our Thoughts Are Prayers, brings that message as well, doesn't it? And Dr. Holmes' phrase, mind your own business, takes on an even deeper meaning. For those of you who work with me in classes and in counseling sessions, you're constantly being made aware of speaking, writing, and thinking about what you do intend as opposed to what you do not. Because the energy of declaration goes forth from you, whether you are thinking positive or negative. The impersonal, eternal law receives the impression of my thought. Like produces like. Like attracts life. Like draws to itself like. Always. And although you've heard me say the following words many times, this time I am quoting Ernest Holmes as saying, we cannot make affirmations and do spiritual mind treatment for 15 minutes a day and then spend the other 23 hours and 45 minutes denying the things we have affirmed by returning to judging, criticizing, and lamenting, and obtain the results we seek. You think he's kidding? You think I'm kidding? We send out our word, and it sets in motion the power. But if we begin to think the opposite thing, it gets the word as soon as it's thought. It neutralizes then my earlier words and destroys any positivity, any opportunity for the positive to actually go into action and continue. This is the whole picture of cause and effect. For me, the discovery of Holmes' book, The Magic of the Mind, which I talked about a little bit last week, where he describes the steps in spiritual mind treatment, is such a boost in our spiritual practice methodology. So I want to quote him directly from that book. The fourth and concluding step in a spiritual mind treatment is our complete and wholehearted acceptance. I have it capitalized. He has it in italics to really draw your attention to it. Wholehearted acceptance of it as being accomplished. The result of the treatment depends entirely upon the fact that it can become part of our experience only as we believe that it will. We can pray and pray. Specifically declare the good we desire. Note he does not say the bad we wish on somebody else, but specifically declare the good we desire time and time again, but until we are able to accept that good as being ours, it will forever be a nebulous dream. When we accept the answer to our prayer, we also have to accept it as being ours right now, not at some future time. The action of declared acceptance by each spiritual being having a human experience is such an important, upgrade that to imperative, is such an imperative part for each of us to attain. It is the divine birthright of every living soul, unless we penalize ourselves, limit ourselves by thought of limitation. It's about realizing the majestic power of the universe, the tremendous power of attraction that holds everything in its place. And that gift is yours, mine, anyone who accepts and practices it. It means opening up the doors of your consciousness to accept the terms of infinite nature, the laws of spirit. Before I close, though, I want to share a story with you titled "Things Don't Change, We Do." And this is from one of Dennis Merritt Jones' books, the title of which is "The Art of Being." He tells the story of the fact that he had been going to the same bank for over 20 years. He knew everybody that worked in the bank, and everybody there knew him. And they knew that he was, kind of an upscale sort of guy, and he was always in a good mood. And so they enjoyed connecting with him. So this particular day, he went into the bank, and when he connected with the teller, he said to her, as he always did, "How's it going?" And she told him. She began an instant download, this unending list of problems that she was having with her 32-year-old son, who still lived at home. He didn't contribute anything to the financial running of the house because he didn't have a job. He didn't do anything about taking care of the house. He didn't really make himself known other than to be there in time for meals and to watch TV. But she said he just doesn't have any interest in anything that would cause him to do something on his own. So Dennis listened to the story, but he said he couldn't wait to speak back when she said, "Well, I can't wait for next year to come." And he said, "Oh, what do you mean?" Thinking, of course, that something was going to change in that relationship. What do you mean? And she said, "Because it has to be better than this year." "Well, why is that?" he asked. She said, "Well, just because it's a new year, I guess. I mean, doesn't that happen, that each year something new unfolds?" And he said, "I was trying to figure out a way to explain to her the theory that if you always do what you've always done, then you'll always get what you've always got. But he tried to be a little more gentle than that by saying, the next act in this drama that you're explaining is not likely to change if nobody in the act is making any changes. It's like watching a poorly written and produced play. If you think the second act is going to be any better than the first act, you're probably going to be disappointed. So he said at that point he was moved to share with her one of his favorite sayings, and he said to her, "Things don't change, we do." With that in mind, wherever you go, there you are. So he said she laughed, she got that message, and then he said, I told her that if you don't address the problem now, next year will be a repeat of this one. Beyond that, perhaps the real problem isn't really her son, but rather how she feels about herself regarding her son. And you heard that 3 times in Standing in the Light this morning, and I didn't set that up. That came right out of Spirit preparing you to hear the rest of that. And then he said, I explained to her that she could change her perception and accept him just as he was, and the result could be some sort of inner peace for her. Or he told her she could change her mind about her willingness to tolerate his behaviors one more day and muster up the courage and the self-expectance to request that he leave and mean it. Because there's a difference, isn't there? So, how about you? Is there any issue going on in your life today that you are hoping will just sort of magically fade away? But you really don't know how to rid yourself of the problem? As Mark Twain once said, denial ain't just a river in Egypt. So if you have one of these things unfolding in your life, or you didn't think you did until this talk started and now you think you might, maybe you want to look at the options, because there are always options. Maybe one of those options honors you, and that your issue becomes yours to solve. What can you do today to begin to deal with that in a proactive manner? What action can you take? Well, as we reviewed in this talk, you have an incredible guidance system. You have choices, sometimes several when you're alert and listening. And you can stop swimming in the river of denial because it's polluted. It's polluted with someone else's negativity. And because it gets you nowhere fast. Instead, you could start practicing living with the law of Spirit and gift yourself with the joy of living. And so it is.